Hi, everyone. Welcome to the live stream event of UniArte. Today we have a conversation between two musicians and a historian. But of course, you noticed that we had a moment of awareness where we took 8 minutes and 46 seconds as an act of solidarity. I will bring in now Charissa, Vernon, and Margot. And I very much would like to thank them for their time and to be having this conversation online so we can interact and share with each other. I would really like to invite everyone who's watching the live stream to engage with us and really use, especially like seeing the times we are experiencing now, to take the time and the space to comment and interact. The moment you comment, we will show your comments on screen, and all can engage and react towards it. Thank you very much for tuning in. And Margot, Vernon, and Charissa, again, thank you. And I'm looking forward for this conversation.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley.
Welcome, everyone.
Hey.
Welcome.
Hello, Vernon. Hello, Margot.
Hello,
Hey,
Charissa.
Charissa. How are you doing? Hey, Margot.
Hello. So
we're in a conversation today, eh?
Yes, we have.
A lot of things going on.
A lot of things going on, and still doing this talk because I think it's more urgent than ever.
Yeah.
Right.
Are we going to introduce ourselves?
Yes.
That's a good idea. Let's start with that. Ladies first.
Okay. Ladies first, then I'll say Charissa first.
Wow. Okay.
So you're up there.
I'm Charissa Granger. I'm a researcher. I'm a musicologist at Erasmus University at the moment. And my research is concerned with liberation. So that's why I think this conversation is important to me as well. And with liberation, it's about the practices within the Caribbean that open spaces for the possibility of liberation. So we're talking here about music, about dance, about carnival. I'm also interested in the place of love and pleasure herein, right? I realize that we spend plenty of time talking about resistance, but we don't spend equal amount of time acknowledging the amount of love that actually is involved in our cultural practices and our art expressions. So with this love, what I'm departing from is a decolonial love, which various cultural critics such as Junot Díaz and Yomaira Figueroa or Sandoval have coined the term decolonial love. And Figueroa says that decolonial love is a practice that bears witness to the past while looking towards a transformative and reparative future by unraveling coloniality. She says decolonial love is a part of that which fuels the work of decolonization as a political and social project. So from there, my work considers music, songs, sounding out, so the way we sound out into the world. Also, depending on the different materialities that we use within the Caribbean, and stories and music. So these are the things that I'm considering in my research.
Cool. Thank you, Margot.
Yeah, still a lady going first. Yes, my name is Margot Groenewald. I'm very happy to be here with you and to have this discussion, this conversation with all the others present as well. I'm a historian, and I tend to say I'm a classically trained historian. I'm the one that goes to the archives looking for patterns of what happened in the past and how this is still sort of telling us something for today. and for the future. So I'm living and working on Curacao. I'm working for the University of Curacao since 2008. That's a long time ago. And I did my PhD here in Curacao on the role of the Catholic Church in social development in the 20th century. Now, my focus very much is on patterns of social exclusion and how, for instance, religion, but there's so much going on, so many dynamics going on that influence social exclusion, how these have shaped our current society and are still shaping, I think, our society. I'm also very much involved in digital humanities, and that's a topic I discussed with Vernon quite a lot, because I think digital humanities, so the use of ICT, the use of, for instance, oral history, and platforms can really help us here in the area of public history. These are just topics I drop in this introduction because I think they may pop up again in this conversation when we discuss silences. Some other issue I'd like to bring forward is that I, together with Shareli and Krishna Ansana, we've set up Reclaiming History as a program within UniArte to sort of awaken people to the idea that there's so much that needs to be done when it comes to looking at, I just focus on Curacao and Curacao history, but this is, I think, valid for a lot of small islands and former colonies, that you cannot just leave history to the historians. It would be a bad thing to leave it to the historians. Looking history in the eye is something that you need to involve everyone in, I think. And that's why I'm very happy with this platform and this conversation. And that's what I hope to bring into the conversation as well. Also from a sort of technical perspective, how do you do that? How do you do oral history? So that's, I leave it for here for now. So following all the ladies, gentlemen.
Gentlemen. Well, yeah, thank you, ladies. My name is Vernon Chatelain, musician, percussionist, first of all, and then part of that, you develop and become a musician. Studied in Cuba for a while, started my studies here when I was young, not that young, but 16. And then from there on, I moved to Cuba when I was 21. So I studied here also with a Cuban percussionist and a Curaçaoan percussionist and more great musicians, Pedro Rodriguez, Henriquez, great percussionists. And they opened my world to my eyes to the world of percussion. And I when I went to Cuba, I really got in touch with oral tradition, you can say, definitely oral tradition, but that's not even, it's very contemporary, and it's very much alive, and that was and it still is Santeria and spiritual ritual drumming, ceremonial drumming. That's one thing that I've been investing a lot of time in, and it's something that's going back in history, but that is still alive today. And recently it's like I try to draw it out. It's like you go to another place and you come back. You explore the world and you always come back. So it's always like a prism, it's kind of like a circle that goes around. And the more you see, the more you want to come back to your own roots and your own basis. And I'm realizing now that I'm very much into Curaçaoan music, the music of my own country, which I've been practicing for a while with different groups and different organizations. We went to Caribbean in 2003. Traveled the world with travel the world. We went to Suriname and the Netherlands, but we traveled the States and different other places. With Quinty, that was between 2009 and 2015, and there you get to see different cultures. And it's all in the sense of trying to to promote your music, your culture. I'm now busy working with the archives. I did with my collective Vanta, we did a piece called Papia, which covers the history of papiamento and its development. And from there, I got in contact with a collection called the Zikinza collection, which is basically different recordings, field recordings made by Pater Brenneker and Alice Juliana in the 1960s. And
50s even,
yeah, in 50s, yeah. And from there, I started working with these recordings where you have songs, stories, and folk tales from the people of Curacao mainly, and the other Dutch Antilles, you can say. I started composing around these stories and around these songs. And next to that, I'm working on trying to recover memory for myself and for just in general on musique de zumbi, which is also a very old traditional music here from the island. That's basically, it's not being practiced that much anymore, but I'm trying to reimagine it in a way, and how it would have been by reading, by interviewing different people that have been in touch with the last, like, people that were really practicing it in the times that it was being played and practiced as a social gathering, as a social happening. And yeah, that's basically my part, and I'm happy to be part of this conversation because I know Charissa. We've known each other for years, and Charissa and I were always talking about these types of topics to see how we can, in terms of liberation, in terms of decolonization, in terms of reinforcing our people, and restructuring also, and getting rid of silences, and at least trying to create the knowledge that there are silences. And yeah, so that's how we got together. That when we go to the next part, how we got together was through, definitely because Charissa and I are working together on the Musique Zumbi research that I'm doing here, plus on my project Voices from Letters is called, where we take those voices from the past, and we try to bring them to the present, and from there go to the future. And then we got in touch with Marjo. I got in touch with Marjo because Marjo is also a historian. A great book, or her PhD. Your PhD you did on Naukus No Column. So and that you're also busy with digital humanities around the Zikinza collection and trying to. So that's how we all kind of came together to be here today. So I'm happy to be part of it, and let's go, guys. It's already 22 minutes. Oh my God. Welcome everybody also. So we're gonna try to keep it open, no? So we can get comments also, and we can work on that, no?
I did see some very nice comments. I don't think there are questions yet, correct?
No.
No, but we have only introduced ourselves.
Yeah. All right.
Very nice.
So let's start. Let me grab we have a few things we wanted to talk about now. Remembering.
Yes.
Yes.
So for me, remembering came up since we're talking about silences. How exactly do we go about remembering when there is so much silence, and what do we actually do with that silence in turn, in order to not forget, in order to remember? So I guess that's my kind of point of departure, and also my interest in the recordings of the Zikinza collection. I guess the overarching question would be, how do we get these voices and these songs and the songs as part of everyday knowledge, everyday practice? And I think these are some of the questions that I had in terms of remembering.
Right. And I guess it's important to state also that this is what we're doing, but maybe to also take what's happening in the States right now and worldwide, basically,
Yeah.
and reflect on that and how that reflects on the term on remembering, basically, like how forgetting or choosing to not remember, can have an effect on today, and we're seeing that in a way.
That's one of the things I find very difficult, and Charissa briefly mentioned that there is, if people choose to forget, they do so for maybe a very valid reason. So you cannot just be a missionary saying, "Come on, we have to break open silences," but also acknowledge the function of that silence. And it's not really a question, and maybe not a great conversation starter, but it's something that I think we should always keep in mind if we really want to be effective in the work that we do. And I find that very, for instance, with the younger generation, with students here on Curacao, seeing the what, for instance, Zikenza can do to them, hearing voices that could be their grandparents' voices. It can be very emotional, but what can you do with it in education? What can you do with it in practice? We did do with not Renee. Come on, the other Rosalia.
Randall Rosalia.
Sorry, Randall Rosalia.
Yeah.
We used Zikenza in the past seminar with a group of first-year teacher students to break open that conversation about what could you do as a teacher using Zikenza in the classroom. And it was for me very interesting to observe that it was not just something that they just unwrapped like a beautiful present and started to use. It can be there can even be a discomfort in when your education is so. I'm not saying this to criticize what's going on wherever, but most of our education and most of the things of our influences are very Western. So how do you fit all these genuine, authentic, local, and from my perspective, beautiful things into that context?
Right.
So that's why I love the idea of musicians being involved in this, because to me, music has such a low barrier. Music is so speaking for itself.
Right.
Yeah, I'm being a romantic, but I'd love to hear from you how you work with Zikenza, and if you see that same sort of barrier of, hey, what's this? Or is it like a beautiful present that you present to people?
Me? You're talking to me, no? Okay.
Well, but you're both musicians, correct?
Both as musicians, that's true. Yeah, as musicians.
I'm this, sorry.
I think it's exactly some things that you mentioned. You mentioned how we do our work, and that's we're doing the work. We're doing work around it, but it has to become in some way. And I always speak in terms of what it has to be and stuff like that, because I'm a brute like that. But I'm gonna try to be as best as possible to communicate. It would be a good idea if it can not be people that are doing work on it, but it becomes a daily thing, like basically like Charissa stated. It has to be. If we go back to the times of Ompi Ellis, for the people from Curacao, Ompi Ellis Uliana, he was a character, basically, that he made a character for himself as Uliana, that called Ompi Ellis, that tells stories, and all of these stories are basically around all the recordings and the stories you find in the Zikenza collection. So it's stories that he collected back in that period, and he brought them in a basically an artistic way, to entertain in an entertaining way, and that's the most social and best way, because discussions that I have with, or conversations I have with Charissa all the time is the archives, and this information is on, let's say, like a very high academic level, which involves a lot of reading, and it's very descriptive and it's very important also. But then the mass majority of people that you want to help, or in that spectrum, that's not, I don't want up and down, but like, so academic, where's my pen? Academic, and then you have the other spectrum. Most of the people that are having access to all of the information that is being like published by academics is here, and then the rest is this big that's not getting that, because nobody's going to read a publication, or very little people are going to read a publication that is 300 pages like long and a whole bunch of references and a whole bunch of like very intense information that you have to do your research on. So indeed, music, theater, just going out and telling stories, people sitting in groups and telling stories and going to each other's house, having a little drink, having a beer together, and sharing these stories is a great way of doing that. And the way I'm using it, per se, because that's what you asked, sorry, the way I'm using it is I'm trying to get the sounds and present it as untouched as possible. So I mean, it's been digitalized, but I'm trying not to use the sample culture of hip hop, like specifically not use it, like, so that you don't use just a bits and pieces of it to make a really cool song, but that you use like 30 seconds complete, without altering the sound, so people can really get that sound and really get what it's saying, and not just the beautiful parts of it, also the ugly parts of it, so that's how I'm trying to use it and compose around it, so that
I love
these
that. Yeah.
voices are, thank you, and these voices are being heard. So that's the way I'm trying to use it with my art.
Yeah. And also, in addition to these voices being heard, it's not simply about them being heard, but it's also about them being in conversation with the present. So we have, music is accessible, but in incorporating these voices and diving into the archive to kind of do an archaeological work to bring these voices out and then recompose them in a sense. I guess that's how I see your process, as a recomposition. It puts these voices also in conversation with you yourself, which has impact on self-knowledge, which has impact on, self-possession, and, a knowledge and sense of self, a strong sense of self. But it also brings these voices in contact with people who ordinarily wouldn't go to the archive, with young people who actually listen to music on, on streaming, or, the access to music these days is just fierce. So these voices become a part of our voices in the present, in a sense. And I think that impact is really what it kind of means to look to our past, so that we can understand our past, and also imagine that past, because there's not very much we can do about past injustices, but we can see how they've developed, in a sense, and see how they're being wielded again in the present, and how we can manage that. So there's a mode of a process of reimagination that takes place, I think, in music, and it's also a way to re-exist beyond these injustices that we have faced historically. And I think that's what it means for me, at least, to look and listen to the past, feel the past as well, because we can't hierarchize some of the senses. We must understand that this is also an embodied experience. So the visceral reaction that your students have in class by listening to these voices, it's truly an embodied experience, right? So when we feel the past with these voices, we can also continue to move forward. It's an act of empowering, I think. by Vernon not snipping and cutting, but actually working with the entirety of those pieces, which are actually not really that long.
That long.
No.
Right? So they're not that long. And by working with the entirety of those pieces and working around them, using reverb or using, sonic mechanisms to bring voices closer and then to move them apart, it really has that kind of visceral impact on the listener. And I think this is where some of the power of the past and how we can also use oral history in that sense to mobilize it so that we might be empowered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful what you both.
Sorry, with we, I mean, just to be specific, I mean all those people who are concerned with justice, who are living in disenfranchised or discomfort because they are in the face of injustice. So that is the we, I guess, that I'm talking about.
Right.
Yeah, that's where, as a historian, the word that we always keep using is contextualization, where you use conversation. I think that's a perfect sort of summary of the three of us being in conversation from history to the now, and what I do is contextualization. I think, but the thing that we most encounter in our work is how history has been treated as a single story. To quote Chimamanda, etc. And that's still the case. And even I know even of history teachers that see history as a single story. So you go to the archives to find the facts, so that you can share the facts of how it happened. And this is very persistent. That's I think why the work of the historian is so important. And what Vernon just said is something I hear a lot. I'm not going to read the full book, I'm not reading full books. I hardly ever read a book front to cover, or it's just reading for pleasure. And I'm not saying this as some sort of, I don't feel guilty or anything. I'm just being efficient. But the thing is, how does the book touch you? And do you understand what a research is doing to the thing that you had in your head? Can you really be, are you open to a new story? And do you see the story, do you see the narrative that the researcher is giving you? Because it's all about choice and selection and perspective and contextualization. So my research could be done by someone else, from just a little different perspective with a little different choice of sources, resulting in a completely different narrative.
Right.
So what then is the value of what we historians do? Just about the whole emotion of history. When I finished my PhD, and I've been telling this a lot, and I keep telling it because I really think it's important for us to understand that so many people just in shopping centers or on the street, people that I don't know, encountered me to thank me. And they didn't thank me because they read the full 300 and some pages of the research, but for the fact that you invested in bringing out details that have been kept away. And it is a lot about emotions, and I don't think we should hide that. It's just how can we
There we go. We got
yes, you can
comment
criticize the
on Naj.
education.
So Najendra, thanks. You can't
Yes.
criticize education because it's not part of a culture. It doesn't feel like culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Yeah,
agree with you. And I love criticizing education. It's just that if you do, and if you work in education, it's good to do this in a nuanced way. And I think Nigel will agree with me.
I don't work with education. This education is horrible.
Strategies, right? We can critique education by the way that we put our syllabus together, right? by the way that
Mhm.
we create
That's it.
bibliographies, and by the way that we reference our own academic papers and research in general. So
Proactively.
a critique is not just, you know, bashing or
Right.
um,
Exactly.
I don't want to say complaining, but
No.
pointing a finger, but it's also being strategic in
Mhm.
how you actually change. So
Yes.
it's about, you know, changing. I mean, do you cite Black women,
Mhm.
for instance? Do you cite Caribbean scholars, or do you look towards other scholars in your research who are not from the Caribbean and don't have that kind of equipment to understand the social, cultural, aesthetics, even poetics of the Caribbean region, and which we must also complicate what the Caribbean region is. But so these are different ways that I would, you know, give a critique in a sense by
Mhm.
actually not necessarily giving a critique, but being proactive, as Brendan just said, or being strategic in the way that I craft my research, and also the way that I craft my syllabus and reading lists for classes and different courses, and conference presentations, etc., etc. So it is a political act to do it in that way as well, and it is a critique.
Right. So just,
Yes.
this goes straight back to what I wanted to ask where I can find more about the music of Zumbi. Yeah, Javier, I will try to answer that real soon, or we can do personally real quick. This what we're just talking about is then can go into the aims and goals or the objectives of this meeting per se, and more of these. It's like what we wrote down is to create a sustained conversation, right? One that goes on, and in art making and sharing of knowledge within the Dutch-speaking diaspora, right? That's what we stated, and to basically connect or reconnect or connect to the larger Caribbean, so that it's a conversation of the larger Caribbean, which we're kind of I don't know if we're excluded out of it, or we've been excluded out of it, or we've chosen to be excluded out of it. There's a whole Caribbean that we're part of as Caribbean people, but the Caribbean people, one, don't see us as Caribbeans. Do we see ourselves as Caribbeans? And we're connected to Holland in such a way that it makes it almost impossible to actually ground and be Caribbean and express Caribbean. And that's one thing I maybe we can open up on, like we want to connect to a larger Caribbean region. Like if we talk about education, if we talk about art, if we talk about, maybe this is even sidewinding a little bit from remembering, but like, what are the steps? What is supposed to be done? What can be done, or what do you think is failing? Why are we failing to be part of the Caribbean?
Uh-oh. Well, I just submitted an article on that for a journal, and I'm just waiting for responses to get it published. But I look specifically historically at the years of the 1940s and 50s, so the era of Zikenza, and for instance, how it's possible that we now all discuss in the Caribbean the whole concept of non-sovereignty. And if you delve into the lectures that Da Costa Gomez gave, you know, if you connect Da Costa Gomez work to Bonilla's work on non-sovereignty, they would fall in love with each other. Bonilla being a Puerto Rican, I think, anthropologist who published a lot on non-sovereignty. So the way we are now, a country within a kingdom, is something that is not sort of a set choice or an in-between, you know, phase, but something that you can choose. Now, I'm not, you know, there's a lot to say about that, but the thing is, if you look at the history of Curacao, if you look at the grassroots movements of the 1940s, the way the women were involved in that, there's so many examples. The grassroots education going on in that era, and then you look at, for instance, someone like Juan Bosch in Santo Domingo, or Eric Williams in Trinidad in that same era. Why were they not connected? And they were just not. And is it just because of the language? Is it Dutch imperialism? There's a lot to say about that. And it's a very good question. And I think it comes back to what I observe in the classroom, but this is more of a question to you than a statement only. That it's so. If I look at young people, the love for the Caribbean does not seem to be there. Do you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's
when you say young people, what's the age demographic?
Well, say the students that I work with. So they're about 18, some 20, 22.
20, 25. 18 to 25.
Yeah.
Say. Younger generation, a little younger than we are, Charissa.
Yeah. No, I can imagine that, because I think that is definitely a capitalist and modernity influence on the young children. I mean, the whole aim of modernity is to keep you disconnected from yourself, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But I see that being ameliorated in a sense in my generation, where there's a hunger for everything.
Yeah.
Right? So there are a number of my students who are simply hungry to find information, and to write on stuff, and to research Caribbean practices, Caribbean history. So I think this is something that is a process. I think it's a processual thing. But that said, there's still a disconnection. There's still fragmentation between even the Dutch Caribbean.
Oh, let's not even start with that. Yeah.
And if you I see your point, and I see these groups and these movements. Do you think there is a difference between the young people? I still consider you young. The young people that stayed on the island, and the ones that are, for instance, studying abroad in the Netherlands. Is there?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, there are a number of students that come to me and they're like, I need to connect with my roots. That's why I'm doing this research. And I'm like, roots? I mean, rather, let's look at routes in terms of, Edouard Glissant. But yes, we can work together and do that. So I think not being in the Caribbean, not being on the islands, gives people a different perspective where they want to look elsewhere. They want to know, and it boils down to a matter of self-knowledge. They're looking for themselves, basically, of them, and that's why there's always a return to the region for knowledge.
Always.
And self-empowerment, because what they're facing in their institutions is, a teaching of, you cite these people, you reference these people, this is knowledge, this is what knowledge is, and there's a visceral rejection of that. And the way to reject that is by looking inwards, and inwards takes them back to the region when they're facing such institutional structures.
Sure. I guess for me personally, like when I really started to look and appreciate more of Curaçao culture was when I moved to Cuba to study Cuban music. Started studying Cuban music, and the thing about Cuba is you study classical music, so that's more complex, because you're studying something that was created mainly in Europe, and then you're studying that in a Caribbean context. So you have, as soon as you get into the school, you're in classical world, and you're speaking a creolized Spanish language. And then you come out of the school, it's rumba everywhere, it's culture everywhere, it's religion, like Afro Afrocentric religions, and it's all this. So that's when I also like went into to that type of music. But then personally, I started to realize, hey, I have this also in Curacao. Like we have this also there. And that's the first step just for the healing, I think, of Curacao, of a Curaçaoan. And then you get to the next part of healing as a Curaçaoan, Aruban Bonairean, as a joint like community. And then you have the next step where it's like ABC and SSS islands. And then you go to the larger picture where it's the whole Caribbean, like that we're one also, because musically, if you just look at like Ritmo con Mina, for example, the music, the popular music here, it's basically referencing melodies, rhythms, and harmonies from one, okay, Curaçaoan, let's call it Curaçaoan in the region, but also the French Antilles. But is the knowledge that we're doing that? Is it, so I'm talking about Guadeloupe, Martinique, Haiti, but are we aware that we're doing that? And then I guess if there's awareness that this is happening, I think this brings more like connection also, and it makes you a larger like conversation, part of a larger network, instead of just being, oh, I'm playing this groove from Ritmo con Mina and it's Curaçao. Yeah, it's Curaçao, but they play the same groove in Martinique, and they play the same groove in, and that's one thing I really want to do also with a further project, try to see how you can connect, for example, Musiki Zumbi, for example, Tambu, for example, Ritmo con Mina, and all that with the other lesser Antilles, other Antillians or lesser Antilles, the other Antilles, so French Antilles, British Antilles, or whatever you call it.
Yeah. So Vernon, if you could say a little bit about how you're going about doing research about these instruments, right? So the instrument now, the Kapsal.
Yeah.
If you could tell a little bit about that, and also how you're using these instruments. If you could talk about how you're going about building, and just tell us the story of, because you're now in Curacao on a long research stay, right? So if you could tell us a little bit more of how your work is looking, especially where these instruments are concerned, and what exactly you're doing with these instruments.
Okay, so basically these are for Musiki Zumbi, these are instruments that we all know. And so I'm looking at the Musiki Zumbi from Banda Riba, specifically because you have Banda Riba and Banda Bao. So the eastern side of the island is Banda Riba, western side is Banda Bao. And in Banda Riba you have the style of Musiki Zumbi where they play with a mouth bow called the Penta. And basically I'm looking at different like materials like this of Ellis Juliana, Guia Etnologico, right? And in here you find, like, for example, the benta and the other instruments and how it's made. This is all work of Ellis Juliana, where he drew all of these, and he published this book, this Guia, and I think there's 4 volumes. And you have like the measurements and all that. So I'm looking into trying to recreate those instruments on my own to really embody how they were created, because there's no like general or how do you call it, industrialized way to make it. So it was all handcrafted, and I'm working together with, which I consider very important also, reference like other friends and people that are contemporaries that do it, that work with this same material. So Randy St. Jacobs is my age, a little younger even. He's a great musician, and he's one of the people of the new generation that are still busy with Musiki Zumbi. I've talked to Rishin Alanzano about research on the instruments and the music style. I've talked to the father of Randall, René Rosalia. Not René, but Rubin, on making the instruments, with Richard Dust on making Barry Grandi. So it's basically going back, but the way to go back is by visiting and talking to different people, because that's... Yeah.
How do you see these instruments being promoted? So, it's still considered indigenous or folk or, in whatever category that we might place it. It's not part of popular conversation. It's not part of our radio stations. It's not part of our music school. So if it is, correct me. So how do you see this being promoted? Like, how can we get these instruments excavated in a sense and dust them off and mobilize them for the power that they embody in themselves?
I guess it's in the hands of what I think it's in the hands of musicians and the artists that can use it in more popular context. One. So the way to kind of dust it off also is like from bringing it from out of the books, because it's documented in the books, very well documented. There's a lot of research on it, but now it has to become something that it's not just, I don't know if the word is correct. It's not just like a relic that's just laying there, but it's like something that's right, that's being used in modern terms. So one of the things I've been talking to like Richard Doost and I have to talk to some people. So to you, I've been talking to you about it, Charissa. It's like right now I'm working with Ralph Durgaram. He has a Beat Freak studio. We're recording all of these instruments from the Musiki Zumbi collection and digitalizing them and trying to create like a contact sound bank, where artists in different genres and especially like electronic music can access these sounds as samples to put in their music. That's one aspect. But then I've already realized that you're taking something that's basically hasn't been preserved and bringing it to a technological world. How about you need everything in between, and that's basically its original form. Music in its original form. So definitely the next project would have to be try to get all these heads together, like with Sorendi, with Randall, with whomever else is interested, young cats, especially, that we start composing. Like Sorendi is already doing great work on that. Like he's composing music.
Who is?
Like Sorendi St-Jacobs.
Okay.
So I have to reference him because he's helping me also with the research and how to make all these instruments. He went to chop wood together and trees and so we can make the mouth bow and stuff like that. Try to get these. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, there is a comment in the live comments by Xavier Heerman.
Composer of a robot, I believe that we have to write it, compose it, write music lessons books about it and music history books about it and introduce these to musicians. This is what I'm currently working. Good, man. Good, Javier. Amazing. Yeah. That's basically it. We should connect with Javier. Yeah.
Contact and connect.
Yeah, Javier, hit us up and so we can connect. I mean, this is also part of the work, no? We're online.
Definitely about connection.
And I know now that Javier is doing that. So we can connect and we can and then it becomes incremental. It becomes like exponential instead of just like one person like pushing and tugging,
Right.
Now I can connect with Javier and then we can go and come see what he does there and come to Curacao with it. And so that's one part. Like today, you guys just saw E.B. Sprott and he's helping me out with how to make skins for the drums. Like there's a shortage of skins.
That's your guy in the background.
Yeah, the guy. He's sleeping now. But yeah, thank you for this conversation. I like your comments on the archives and its possible erasures. Oral history seems to remediate those erasures at least partly. I'm curious to know about the erasures and possible silences within, for example. How do you deal with that in your work? True. We didn't even go into that.
Yeah.
Zoom is good. Let's close that.
No,
we're already an hour.
But wait, before we go to that, I won't forget. If Majo could just say a little bit about the digitalizing because you mentioned you're digitalizing these. So if Margot could talk a little bit about oral history and digitalizing, and then we'll get to the silences.
Right.
Well, I can do that in response partly to one of the questions that
Richardson.
Wickerton is asking. Yes, a lot of oral history is very popular on Curacao, and that's the good news. So there are lots of people out there who'd love to work on recording voices of all sorts of minorities, and I think we really need to look very seriously into that and see if we can start, get the funding to do that before people die, because people tend to do that. And that's in particular about minorities. But how do you define a minority? Who is silenced? And the more you think about it, the more you realize that the mainstream is a small group. There are the women, LGBT community, and there are all sorts of ways to look to society and see which voices are missing. Now, the difficult thing about oral history is that, and I've worked with Rosemary Ellen on that in particular. I really want to credit her for her work, which she has been doing in this area for over 20, 30 years, as well as Boy Antoine on Bonaire and Frans Boy on Aruba. We do have a great oral history tradition. There are so many recordings still there. For instance, Gladys Dorrego has a whole closet full of women's voices that are just there. So it is a lot. It has to do a lot with organizing, getting the money, and just doing it. There's so much that needs to be done, and we just have, too little time and hands. The thing with oral history is that you need to be very careful in how you use the voices, how you contextualize, and this is what Richardson is also referring to. When I do courses like the one, trainings like the one I've done for Reclaiming History, and we will be doing those online again shortly. This summer there will be a new training session for doing historical research as a non-trained historian. And when it comes to oral history, there are many warnings, and I always tell people it's very easy. If you have, say, 4 brothers and 2 sisters, and you ask each of them, what was mommy like? How many different answers will you get? It's not, you cannot misuse a human being as some sort of an encyclopedia for telling the truth about the history. And that's what often happens. People go to people and ask them, because you were there, so you know. And so even within the Ziek en Zaak collection, even though I just love Juliana and Brenneker for having done this, and there's still so much more in Naam, so many boxes full of tapes, yeah. Because Alice Juliana was sort of an addict, a junkie reporter walking around with his old-fashioned sort of recorder. So there's so many voices there. But who was asked? Which questions were asked? From what perspective? What's the context of this? For instance, when I read her comment on education, I immediately responded based on a conversation I know, we had in the past on social media. So if I wouldn't have seen her name, I would have responded differently to that same question. So there's so much context going on in the things that we do. And so on one hand, digitization, digital humanities can really help us. I'm part of a larger Caribbean project, Caribbean Institute for Digital Humanities, which is connected to the Oral History Institute in Florida. And they base their work on, it's really rooted in what Hurston did, Norris Hill Hurston in the US, which is being fully open. Cultural humility, I love that phrase. Being culturally humility.
Humbled.
So you're humbled. You're just open. You're no one, and you just want to know the story from that other person. So what I'm trying to say is there are so many opportunities, but it really needs to be done well. I think the money is out there if you really want to. But we need to put the effort in it and to really acknowledge the importance of this, because people are not going to the archives, not only because it's dusty. People not going to the it's not it. I love going to the archives. That's music to my ears. When I'm there, I'm in a different world.
Yes,
You know, sometimes I'm shocked when I open the doors, go back on the streets, and I see a car. You know, it's, if you have imagination, you love archives, but it's just a piece of the whole picture, and we need to add voices and sounds and impressions of the past, but we need to do that structurally, and we need to do that sort of radically. So I hope that of all the sad things that are going on right now, maybe this will be an awakening for us to respect our history, because it's the patterns that are demonstrated now and that people see now
ignorance
are just it's not from today. It's something from a very long past.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think it's for those who think that we are people. Yes, for those who think that we are people from a cultural field discussing cultural things, that we are historians and musicians discussing, you know, those things. This has very much to do with the essence of who we are as citizens. If we do not shake off that sort of old coat and build a new human, sort of Caribbean human being, to paraphrase Frans Fanon, how can we be citizens? How can we build a society?
Right. And then we can, I think we can go into the silences right away, because if we talk about basically just Ezekiel's collection, a few of the stories, or I would consider it like, and it is considered, it's considered history of the world. It's local. It was all recorded here, but you can consider it history of the world in the sense that a beautiful song. I think it's nice also to be in entertaining. A beautiful song is always like very easy. It goes Libertad, Galité, la reina Victoria Mandeco, Libertad, Galité, Victoria Mandeco, Libertad, Galité. So Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, and this was the song that everybody sang. So if you reimagine it in a story, she's telling the story. Ora na bati bell di libertad, when they rang the bell, the liberty, the bell on liberty. So this was 1863, 73, 63, which I don't know which one, if it's 63 or 73. Anyway, liberty, which when they stopped slavery, abolished slavery. And that's 63. The song, 63, yeah. That's the song they sang. And they're singing La Reina Victoria Mandeco. Who was La Reina Victoria for Curacao back then? So this made me go research how do they mean La Reina Victoria in context of what this lady is talking about. She was like hardcore complaining. No, Holland didn't. The Willem III didn't want liberty. Didn't want to abolish slavery. He went and he counted his money. He did his conteo, he counted his money. And after that, when he had that straight, we all got liberty. We all got freed. And then we sang Libertad, Galité, La Reina Victoria Mandeco. And then you see what's happening here. You see then that how Victoria, Queen Victoria of England, was a great promoter of, like, in that period of abolishing slavery. I mean, you have to read on it. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
I'm sorry I went I sidelined, but this, why would they sing La Reina Victoria?
Yeah.
You know, and then it makes you go research further. Like, what does La Reina
And
Victoria have to do with that?
just put 5 historians in one room and they'll have 5 explanations. There's no one thing
I have
there
just one.
that you can call the truth.
Exactly.
And it's about the conversation. It's not about the answer. It's about the
And it's not about
conversation.
And talking about that conversation, we have a question by Lisa Pourier, who is asking, can any of you envision non-traditional forms of education outside of academia? And if we're talking about having conversation, then for me, that happens in spaces of gathering, right? So if we notice now what is happening, these protests and the response to the protests, it's not about the looting and the violence, it's about gathering. It's about preventing people from gathering. If we look at the history of Tambu or the history of steel band, we see that we had all kinds of bans and sanctions and laws on the books that prevented music. But why? Because of gathering. So I think a non-traditional form of education would be to gather, right? And have these conversations in that sense.
I agree with you. With big gatherings and sort of a big awakenings usually happen long after the first persons have been so brave as to stand up, the Quincy Garios, etc. They first once you have big gatherings like we have now. I maybe I'm an optimist, but I hope to that we can see a little bit of turning points into what's happening now. That it's now becoming sort of more of a mass awakening.
Yeah.
You see my point?
Yeah.
Because the gathering at first, I was part of the sort of one of the sort of peace demonstrations here in Curacao, and what struck me, really struck me, was the absolute horror in the faces of people. And that was 2019. Absolute horror looking in my face and in all our faces. What are you doing here? And that's quite telling. That's quite telling. And it was not just disdain or disagreement. It was pure hate and horror. Being horrified at you see my point? So it's
Yeah.
how do you come from a small group where it's not about the gathering to this large group like you had yesterday in Amsterdam, where and many cities, but where it is about the gathering, where it is about enough is enough. Where's the tipping point? Did we go beyond the tipping point now?
Right,
or am I
right.
a romantic?
Yeah, I mean, about the gatherings that are going on, which I completely agree with, and it's basically a gathering for solidarity, and now and in the States is basically, if you see San Francisco and these are other larger states, it's a gathering for solidarity, but the looting that is actually what they call looting, and the protests that are being held in the states where people are victims, like proper, and where George Floyd was a victim also. These are like reactions on against like injustice, and I think like it starts with trying to build small gatherings and sitting together and telling each other these stories, and bringing basically it's Lisa asked a non-traditional way, but this is the most traditional and most effective way of how do you call basically spreading information. Is just sitting down and talking and having, and especially I wrote it down, ode and respect to elders, because it was always the elder of that community that would sit down and tell these stories. For that elder has the knowledge passed down to him, but also from his experience, you know. And this is also a part, just sitting down in a group and exchanging information. Me and EB right here, we talk about a whole bunch of things, just the two of us. But then how can you make like something that's that is sustained, that's sustainable, that you come together each week and you gather and you tell stories and you play the benta and you discuss about who Victoria was. You discuss about Bati Mayo. How am I going to beat Amayo? You discuss about going to Hispaniola. What is Hispaniola? What was the meaning of Hispaniola? You discuss about Tula taught me, you know, stuff like that. Small. It's so small, and it's actually it's a non. I guess we've been trying so hard to be non-traditional and be like modern that it kind of it. I feel like it's we're trying really hard, and that we're trying really hard also to be modern. But that means that we're also trying very hard to forget what we already had that was very effective, and that's like traditional, like sitting down and telling stories.
I think what you say is very powerful part of idea sharing and learning. Very powerful. On the other hand, if you look at the history of being subversive on a small island like Curacao, the name that pops up is Marchena, Pablo Medardo Marchena, who wrote a pamphlet in 1929, and I used that in the Reclaiming History series. I lectured on that, in which he said, what is it with us Afro-Curaçaoans that we are comprise about 85–9% of the population and are not able to join forces in a way that really makes a difference? And so where do you go from being small and effective to being a majority in your and changing laws and changing parliament and changing justice?
And we're going into a colonial history, which is not really being addressed enough, and that hasn't really changed that much, which people like Moises Acosta Gomez, El Doctor, he worked hard on, but then we forget, and that we're still not there. You know, we're not there. We're not even close. And
but could this be the time?
It is always the time. It is always the time, I guess. But then how do you? I think it's about remembering. I think that's why we're talking about remembering. Is a good. This should be the time. Remembering our strengths, and the strength of being together and not being fragmented. Everything is very fragmented now. The community, the diaspora, the African diaspora, which is the Caribbean. The Caribbean is part of the larger African diaspora.
Yeah,
it's so like dispersed and so fragmented. And this conversation goes back to, again, one of our aims and goals. That's why we're talking an hour and 70 minutes here. We need to do more of these, like weekly. Like Charissa and I were talking about this. We should do this, Charissa. That we go online more and talk and gather personally also and talk. Is to connect to the larger Caribbean, so that we know our power, that we know that Bulabanda and Katiwo Abulabay, the slaves that flew away back to Africa. That story is not only told in Curacao, it's also told in the other parts of the Caribbean, but also in the States.
But what about a rebellion? What about going on the streets?
Yeah.
What about really?
Yeah. With all, yeah. That's again, you know, what do you think, Charissa? Help me out here, man.
Yeah, Charissa, well, your face is just telling so many stories, but there's no
because
subtitles.
I'm thinking about general disruption, and when you talk about rebellion and the agitation that we're seeing, once again, I return to the tyranny that exists against gathering. And it's a matter of, we see the police playing that colonial game of divide and conquer.
Yeah, we have a comment on that as well.
And under, this is happening under the disguise of violence, looting, burning. But simply gathering has also always been an issue. And this is why I think art becomes crucial and powerful, because it enables a space of gathering. Also, I think we need to also think in terms of capitalism and coloniality. So this is not a domestic thing. And to stand in solidarity with what is going on right now with the protests, it's also against a global situation of imperialism. It's also on global sanctions that even through a pandemic were maintained. So these are not just local things. When we rebel, when we go on the streets, we need to think of solidarity not just in a one-dimensional way, but think about it in kind of a network, because this is not just about domestic inequality. It's not just about anti-Blackness and anti-worker and anti-poor, but it links to global imperialism and what is now taking place. I mean, you know, these protests are linked with so many other different things, and it's important to make these connections, especially when we're speaking about solidarity. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
We.
What do you think about riots?
What do
Rebellion? No, Marco.
I believe in radicalism.
I know what you think about riots.
I know. I believe in radicalism. Radical, not in the sense of radical being really standing your ground. I just, when the lockdown was over, there was just one thing I wanted from my office, and those are these books by Paulo Freire. And I believe in his radicalism. In particular, education. I think on the island, education has not made a full and complete stop to be rebuilt again. That's something I would love to go on the street about. I published an article on the Caribbean character of higher education in the Dutch Caribbean in a historical perspective, but also looking at education right now. And I think it's a violation of human rights, the way we treat culture and language in education on Curacao right now. And I think on the smaller islands like Bonaire, it's even worse. If it is a violation of human rights. So yeah,
disconnected from their own selves in a sense.
Exactly. Yes, and it's there's damage done. It's not just. And it's a damage done to your, well, we quoted Da Costa Gomes several times in this conversation, but again, it was he who said, if you just let your kids fly out, and like you did, but nonetheless you returned, but you in these critical years when they're 17, 18, 19 years old, you lose them for your own society. It's just not an individual problem. It's a societal problem. So I would love to see something like when young people have finished their half of ABO, for instance, to keep them on the island and to provide them for 1 or 2 years with some sort of extracurricular sort of not a sabbatical or gap year, but whatever. So they can make solid choices about who am I, what are my roots, and go from there. And if they fly out then, you know, there's some direction and there's some grounding, and we
Right
let
on.
kids leave the island without that grounding. And
Right on. Right on. Right on. Right on. I fully agree. I fully agree with that. I've been talking to like a whole bunch of people on this, and about there are like three things that happen when you go to Holland in general, not even if you're seven. So in general, from Curacao, I'm not even talking about the Caribbean, but from Curacao, being an island that has been robbed and basically shaped in a very brutal way by Holland, moving out from Curacao to go to Holland, three things happen, three phases. First of all, you go completely mad. And then in that going mad, you have to like try to deal with why you're going mad. And the third is you try to find yourself within this new madness, basically, which is I call it madness because that's what it is. You're completely not grounded anymore. You've lost family, so you're not with your family anymore. You're not in your house. We're a small society, we're a small island, so it's not like we even moved from one barrio, one neighborhood to the other sometimes, and then you take a plane and you go 10,000 kilometers further away from a culture that's completely has nothing to do with yours. So these three things happen to you regardless of how old you are. And now, if it happens to you when you're 25, then you've already had some kind of like establishment, right? Within your what you can call it, roots or society or your social structure or whatever, and your innate self.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you're 17, it you know, you have to be the ones that have made it are lucky.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it still surprises me, and it shows our capacity. It shows our brilliance as Caribbean people, as being from different, like more than 5 different like identities in one, and thinking in 4 different languages as Curaçaoans, because I think in 4 languages, literally. It amazes me. It amazes me that it's possible, that we can do it. But the chances actually of surviving that is like very slim if you really look at it like. So I'm an advocate of trying to like, if Curacao is too small, whatever, how about we do region where the culture is not that big of a step, you know? It's not such a big step to go from Curacao to maybe Santo Domingo, Curacao, maybe Puerto Rico,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe the French Antilles. Then you'd have to know French. So stuff like that, things like that, you know. Also, yeah, also Aruba, yeah. You know, it's the step is too big, and give them like 2 years. Indeed, that's a great. I haven't thought like if 2 years that you have to, like, Cuba has military service. You know, you have to do 2 years of military. You get free schooling, but then you have to do 2 years of military service. Let's not call it military service. Let's call it. It's not military service corps. Let's call it like you do something to create, to give to the community. You do something to give to yourself before going. Like, I don't know. That's true. We have to work on that because de sprong naar Nederland is veel te groot, en het zal het altijd zijn. It will always be too big, always.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is that our entire lives, from kindergarten up until high school finishing, we have been prepared to look direction Holland or direction states, but mostly Holland. So I think, 2 years is great, but I think there also needs to be a reformulation of the basic foundation of our education system. There's so much that I had to relearn. There was so much undoing that I had to do before I could actually get to where I needed to. I was playing catch up my entire academic career. So there's a lot a lot of reformulation and radical remapping of our educational system that needs to take place. Yeah, I think we are going to end it there on our part. Are there any questions from our interlocutors?
Hey, Sharad is here.
Yes, I'm back. This is an amazing conversations, guys. I'm there behind the scene listening, and it's incredible, and I'm super happy that this is happening. Unfortunately, of course, we're not in the same space or even in the same country at the moment, but I guess this is an opportunity, and this is a way to start, right? By having conversations also online and between disciplines, right? So hearing all of your and your experiences, things that I ran into as well, talking about education system awareness and this catching up, that's the top that we'll be chasing. But I mean, it's a blessing because it gives you kind of purpose in life as well. So let's always have to be positive. I think it's good to check before we close down if there's any urgent questions. Let me say that on the website, the network will be there. I mean, on Facebook, all of us are on Facebook. So if individually some direct questions need to happen or emailing, please email to info@uniarte and it will be emailed further so that we can share knowledge, share information. And I'm extremely happy, like I said before. And I'm not seeing any questions. So it says all clear, thanks a lot. So yeah, thank you guys. And I'm hoping to have more conversations like that or be hosting more conversations. So if people feel the need that they have done some research or they're doing a particular practice, don't see it as okay, UniArte to invite. Please just come up with suggestions. That form is here to be shared and we organize it, plan it in, and it can be shared for our generation and the next generations to come. Right. So thanks a lot, Mo, Vernon, Charissa. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for
And
sharing.
thank you.
Thanks, Aralia.
Okay.
Yo.
And thanks everyone for connecting in.
Yes.
Definitely. Get in touch, everybody. Javier
Yes.
and everybody else, get in touch. All right.
Okay.